The scent of sizzling garlic and rosemary chicken filled our home, a familiar and comforting aroma that usually signaled a perfect, quiet evening. But tonight was different. Tonight was my 40th birthday, and my husband, Mark, had been a bundle of nervous energy all week. He'd shooed me out of the kitchen, insisted on handling all the cooking for our small dinner, and had been whispering on the phone with a frequency that made me smile. He was planning a surprise, and I loved him for it. I stood by the large bay window in our living room, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street of our suburban Ohio neighborhood. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows. At 40, I felt a quiet contentment. My life with Mark was stable, loving, and predictable. We had a good rhythm, our careers, our book club, our weekend hikes. After the stormy chaos of my childhood, this predictability was a sanctuary I never took for granted. He's probably flying in my college friends, I mused, running a hand over the soft fabric of the new emerald green dress Mark had bought me. Or maybe he managed to get tickets to that Broadway touring show I've been wanting to see. I heard Mark's footsteps behind me before his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Excited," I corrected, leaning back into his solid warmth. "You've been like a secret agent all week." "Who did you call?" "My old roommate, Jessica." "Please tell me you didn't try to track down my cousin Lisa from Seattle." "The last time we spoke was at our wedding." Mark just kissed my cheek. "You'll see. It's someone important. Someone I think you really need to see." That gave me pause. Need to see. That was a curious choice of words. My mind flickered through a Rolodex of faces. My parents were gone, passed away years ago in a car accident. My circle was small, intentionally so. Who could I possibly need to see? The doorbell rang, its chime slicing through the quiet jazz Mark had put on. My heart did a little flip. "They're here," Mark said, his eyes sparkling with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It was more than excitement, it was a profound, almost solemn anticipation. "You get the door. I'll just be right here." He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze and retreated towards the kitchen doorway, watching me. I took a deep breath, smoothing my dress, a smile already forming on my lips. This was it, the surprise. I pulled the heavy oak door open, the cheerful, "Happy birthday" dying on my lips before it could even form. The woman standing on my porch was a stranger. And yet, she wasn't. She was probably in her late 60s, with kind, tired eyes that held a universe of stories. Her hair was a soft, silver gray, styled in simple waves. She wore a simple, neat navy blue dress and clutched a small, worn leather handbag. The evening breeze ruffled the hem of her coat. But it was her face, the shape of her jaw, the slight arch of her eyebrows, the way her mouth curved into a tentative, trembling smile. It was like looking into a faded, future-tinted mirror. It was like looking at a ghost from a life I had sealed shut decades ago. My breath hitched. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the neighborhood fading into a dull hum. My gaze dropped from her face to the small, tattered object she was holding out to me. It was a stuffed animal, a once white lamb, now grayed with age and love, one of its black button eyes hanging by a thread. I knew that lamb. I had slept with it every night until I was 7 years old. I had called it Lambie. My eyes snapped back to her face, and the years fell away. I was no longer Sarah, the 40-year-old architect, wife to Mark, homeowner. I was little Sarah Jennings, a scared, lonely little girl waiting on a social worker's scratchy couch. Sarah. Her voice was soft, weathered by time, but achingly familiar. A voice from my deepest, most carefully guarded memories. "My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Miller. I was your foster mother. A long, long time ago." The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared, my mind reeling, tumbling back through a tunnel of time I had worked so hard to brick up. Mark was suddenly beside me, his hand on the small of my back, a steadying presence. "Sarah," he said gently. "This is Eleanor. I found her. I found her." Those two words echoed in the silent cavern of my shock. I managed to step back, a wordless invitation for her to enter. She walked in slowly, her eyes taking in our home, our photos on the wall, me, with a wonder that was heartbreaking. The three of us stood in an awkward triangle in the living room. The fragrant smell of the dinner Mark had cooked now seemed to belong to a different, simpler reality. "How?" I finally managed to whisper, my throat tight. I looked at Mark, my confusion morphing into a dazed curiosity. "How did you?" "It wasn't easy," Mark said, guiding us to the sofa. We sat, Eleanor and I on opposite ends, like cautious diplomats. Mark sat in the armchair, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. You've never talked much about that time, Sarah. Just bits and pieces. The car accident, being moved around. But you once, years ago, you had a fever and you were talking in your sleep. You kept saying a name. Ellie. And you were crying for Lambie. I had no memory of this. I looked at Eleanor. You were, Ellie. She nodded, her eyes glistening. For the first few weeks, you couldn't say, Eleanor. So I was Ellie. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her face. I haven't been called that in 33 years. Mark continued. That name stuck with me. Ellie. And, Lambie. It wasn't much to go on. I hired a private investigator a year ago. It was a long shot. All we had was a first name, a rough time frame, and the city where you entered the system. Your file from that period was sparse. Sealed tight. But the investigator is good. He tracked down a retired social worker who remembered a particularly difficult case, a little girl named Sarah Jennings who was placed for a short time with a wonderful foster mother named Eleanor Miller before a relative was found. I was listening, but I was also 7 years old again. I was remembering the smell of Ellie's, apartment. It always smelled of cinnamon and laundry soap. I remembered her reading to me at night, her voice a soothing balm after the terrifying silence of my new life. I remembered her teaching me how to tie my shoes, her patience endless. The relative, I said, my voice hollow. My great-aunt Carol. Yes, Eleanor said softly. It was what the court decided was best. A blood relative. But, she hesitated, looking down at her hands, which were twisting the strap of her purse. But letting you go was the hardest thing I've ever done, Sarah. You were such a quiet, wounded little soul. We had only 3 months together, but, you felt like my own. 3 months. A blink in a lifetime. Yet, those 3 months were an island of stability in an ocean of trauma. After my parents' sudden death, the world had become a loud, frightening, and unpredictable place. Then I was placed with Eleanor. With Ellie. Mark, seeing my struggle, gently prompted, why don't we move to the dining room? Dinner is ready. We can talk more. We moved like figures in a dream. Mark served the beautiful meal he'd prepared, the rosemary chicken, the garlic mashed potatoes, the roasted asparagus. It was delicious, but I tasted none of it. I was nourished by a different, more potent sustenance, memory and revelation. As we ate, the story unfolded. Eleanor, a widow with no children of her own, had taken in foster children for over 20 years. She had loved them all, she said, but there was something about the little girl with the big, silent eyes who clung to a ragged lamb that had carved a permanent place in her heart. You didn't speak for the first 2 weeks, she told me, her gaze distant, lost in the past. You'd just watch me. I'd talk to you, read to you, and you'd just listen. Then one night, there was a thunderstorm. A loud crack of thunder shook the whole apartment. You came running into my room, Lambie in one hand, tears streaming down your face. You crawled into my bed and you whispered, I'm scared, Ellie. Her own tears fell then, tracing paths through the fine lines on her cheeks. That was the first time you spoke. After that, you started to talk more. You had the most wonderful imagination. You'd tell me Lambie had been on adventures in the jungle. I remembered the feeling of her flannel sheets, the safety of her room during that storm. I had forgotten that. I had locked that feeling of safety away because it was too painful to remember once it was gone. After you left with your aunt, Eleanor continued, dabbing her eyes with her napkin, I thought of you every day. I tried to write, to call, but your aunt, she believed in a clean break. She thought it was confusing for you to have ties to your past life. She never responded to my letters. Eventually, I stopped. I moved on, but I never forgot. I kept a photo of you. Would you like to see it? I could only nod, my own vision blurry. She reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a small, faded photograph, its edges curled. She handed it to me. It was me, a little me I barely recognized. I was sitting on a park swing, wearing a red coat, and I was smiling. Not a tentative smile, but a real, genuine, happy smile. I was clutching Lambie in my lap. I had no memory of that photo being taken. I had no memory of that red coat. I had no memory of ever smiling like that in the year after my parents died. I look happy, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. You were, Eleanor said softly. You were starting to be. That's why it broke my heart to let you go. Mark reached over and took my hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When the investigator found Eleanor, she was living in a small town in Indiana. She never married again. She still fosters the occasional teenager. I called her. I was so nervous. I didn't know if it was the right thing to do. I told her about you, about your life, about what an incredible woman you'd become. And I asked her if she'd like to meet you. For your birthday. I looked from the photo in my hand to the woman who had preserved this fragment of my lost childhood. This woman who had loved me for 3 months and had carried me in her heart for 33 years. This woman my husband had crossed time and silence to find. The dam inside me, the one I had built so strong and so high, finally broke. I remember, I said, my voice cracking. I remember the cinnamon smell. I remember you singing that silly song about a blue-tailed fly. I remember you letting me put curlers in your hair. The memories were flooding back, not as painful stabs, but as warm, healing waves. I cried for you for weeks after I left. Aunt Carol was kind, but she was strict and old. She didn't understand. She threw Lambie away a year later. She said it was too dirty. Eleanor let out a small, pained gasp. Oh, my dear girl. I stood up, the photo still clutched in my hand, and walked around the table. I didn't know what to do, what to say. The gratitude, the grief for lost time, the overwhelming love for my husband, it was all too much. So I simply did what that 7-year-old girl would have done. I leaned down and wrapped my arms around Eleanor Miller. It wasn't a polite, hesitant hug. It was a full, tight, heartfelt embrace. She felt fragile in my arms, but her hug back was strong, sure. She smelled different now, of lavender and faintly of mint, but the feeling was the same. It was the feeling of safety. It was the feeling of coming home. We cried then, both of us. Years of silent wondering and quiet mourning poured out right there in my dining room, with my wonderful, miraculous husband looking on. The rest of the evening was a blur of stories and recovered memories. We talked for hours, long after the food grew cold. I learned about her life, her work with other children. She learned about mine, my career, my marriage, the life I had built from the broken pieces of my childhood. Mark brought out the birthday cake, a beautiful chocolate torte, and they sang, "Happy Birthday," to me, their voices blending together in a harmony that felt more significant than any song I'd ever heard. When I blew out the single candle, Mark knew I hated a forest of flames on a cake. I didn't make a wish. The thing I never even knew I needed had already been granted. When it was time for her to leave, the investigator Mark had hired was doubling as her driver for the evening and was waiting outside. I felt a profound sense of loss. But it was different from the loss I'd felt as a child. This was a temporary goodbye. I don't want to lose you again, I said, holding both her hands at the door. You won't, Sarah, she said, her voice firm. You have my number, my address. I'm only 3 hours away. If you'd like me to visit again, I would, I said without a moment's hesitation. I'd like that very much. She turned to Mark. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for finding me. For giving me back my girl. Mark, ever the gentleman, simply hugged her. Thank you for taking care of my girl when she needed it most. After she left, the house was quiet again. The jazz music had long since stopped. Mark and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a birthday that had forever altered the landscape of my heart. I looked at my husband, this man who had listened to my fevered murmurs and had tucked them away like precious clues. This man who had seen a hole in my soul that even I was unaware of, and had spent a year quietly, determinedly, trying to fill it. How can I ever thank you? I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. He walked over to me and cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the fresh tears that had started to fall. You don't have to thank me, Sarah. Seeing the look on your face when you saw her, seeing you two together, that's all the thanks I'll ever need. I just wanted you to have a piece of your past that was good. I wanted you to know that even in your darkest time, someone loved you. He had given me more than a surprise guest. He had given me a missing chapter of my own story. He had given me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever, the little girl who could feel safe, who could smile in a red coat on a swing. He had bridged a chasm of 33 years with nothing but love and determination. That night, as I lay in bed, the emerald green dress laid carefully over a chair, I wasn't thinking about turning 40. I was thinking about a stuffed lamb named Lambie, the smell of cinnamon, and the sound of a woman singing a silly song. The memories weren't painful anymore. They were a gift, carefully delivered by a husband who knew the deepest, most hidden chambers of my heart. My birthday surprise wasn't a party or a trip or a piece of jewelry. It was a healing, It was the profound, life-altering understanding that our stories are never fully written, that lost connections can be found, and that the greatest gifts are often not things, but people, returned to us exactly when we need them most.